So I'll talk about big data, small apps. Now, before I get started, I'll start with a disclaimer. So just because I have the word big data there, I'm not going to talk about Hadoop, Cassandra, Hive, even though I would have liked to talk about all of them. I'm using the word big data in a different context. So just stay with me to understand what I'm trying to say. It used to be for more than 1,000 years, I think therefore I am. But in the last 10 years, there has been a big change. So can you notice the change? Right? So you would have guessed it. I have a smartphone, therefore I am. I mean, even if you have a feature phone, and you don't exist in this world, you need to have a smartphone. So what is the connection between this big data, small apps, and the smartphone? Right? I don't know how many of you would have noticed this white device out there. It's a beacon. It's an eye beacon. Actually, if you have a smartphone with you and you enable your Bluetooth and you walk past that, it will give you your exact location in this room. Actually, as you walk into this room, your GPS coordinates are known by your smartphone. As you walk past the beacon out there, your exact location in this room is known. So we have a beacon outside in the pathway, and we have one beacon in the room. So whether you are present in the pathway or you are present in the room is known to the device. Now, based on this, if you have a Zoho app in your smartphone, amongst the all possible agenda out there, which is there in the cloud, the exact data is being pushed to you, right? So based on the time, the location, and where you are present, whether you are present in this room or whether you are present in the pathway. If you are present in the pathway, the food menu would be given to you. If you are present in the room, the agenda would be given to you, right? So based on all this, amongst the all possible agenda, the agenda that's relevant to you is being pushed to you. So if you look at it, the data out there in the cloud, the Zoho app which is running in your smartphone is actually picking the data from the cloud. So the data out there in the cloud is the big data. Then you have the small app which is running inside your mobile device. Then you have the user context, which is a filter. In this case, the user context is your location, the time, and the specific location, whether you're in this room or in the pathway. So that's the user context. And finally, you have the value, right? So you have the big data out there in the cloud, the small app in your hand, the user context as a filter, and then you finally have the value. Let's take another enterprisey kind of an example. I'll just extend the same example that Vijay used yesterday, which was about customer centricity. Like basically, a customer calls into the organization, and then the support person out there picks up the phone call. It's Friday afternoon. The support person is picking up the call. It must be from an Indian customer. The support person has to go for a movie. It's going to be a dreary call, right? I mean, try to answer the Indian customer on a Friday afternoon. You know your evening is going to go for a toss, right? So now the support person is going to be very unhappy about the whole thing. But just imagine at that point of time when he is taking the call, assume there's a pop-up that comes and it gives like 3-4 information. Something like, this customer has paid AMS for the last 2 years. I mean, Indian customer has paid AMS for the last 2 years, right? And then he is in touch with your product management team to give a lot of ideas. He is in touch with your marketing team to provide you with a case study. Not only that, he is a champion of your product in the customer's organization, right? Suddenly, when this 4 information is flashed in front of the customer support person, he exactly knows what to do. He knows the importance of this customer, and what would have been a very dreary call for the Friday evening gets converted into a moment of value. So the point I'm trying to make here is, if the context of the user, that is the support person, is taken, and you go out there to the data in the cloud, you filter it, then there's a lot of value that gets created. So our definition of big data is, it's basically the application data, the cloud application data, enhanced with data from lots of other applications out there in the cloud. So this might sound a bit theoretical, so let me take a practical example. So let's take a CRM kind of an application out there in the cloud. If you were to look only at your application data, it's basically the name, phone, and location of the prospect, or the lead. That's the data you would have in the database in the cloud. Suddenly, when you look at it from a big data perspective, lots of other information can enrich the data that is there in the cloud. Basically, it could be the LinkedIn profile of the customer or of the prospect, the Twitter handle, more information about the company from Google News or Hoover database or any of those. It could be even the weather info. Basically, if you're going to talk to your prospect, you need to have a conversation starter, right? It should be weather or sports or something. Obviously, you can't get the sports, so you get the weather info. Or if you want to get spooky, you can look at the customer's Facebook info, find out whether he's in a good mood or a bad mood, and then make the call. Or even surprise him with some personal details. Well, I don't know what the impact of that could be, but that's possible. So suddenly, what was just a small amount of data out there in the cloud is enriched with data from lots of other cloud applications, and a value is created. Similarly, another example, if you take a recruitment application, so you have the candidate's information in that, and now you could enrich with, assume it's a typical developer kind of an candidate, you can enrich that with a lot more Quora participation, GitHub check-ins, YouTube talks, blogs, all these, right? So the important point here is there is some data in the application, in the cloud, that's enriched with data from lots of other applications out there. So that's the big data. Now let's talk about the small apps. The small apps basically run in devices. The devices comes in a lot of form factors, right? From a desktop, laptop, iPad, iPhone, glass, gear, brain implant, whatever, right? So it comes in a lot of form factors. And the most important thing is the big data which is there out there in the cloud, the value is seen by the user in the small device, right? Actually, I should have put the Hogneckel Falls, but I just got Niagara Falls, so I just put it. So this is your big data, and that's your small app, right? Now you can't go and drink directly. So that's bottled Niagara water. So that's when the user context comes in as a filter, and it helps you to filter the data and consume it in your small app. See, the user context is basically, in the case of the beacon, it was an example of the location, the time, whether you're in this room or whether you're in the pathway. So all these are the user context. So the big data out there in the cloud is big, the small app is small, so the user context comes in as a filter and it's able to add value for you. Interestingly, the small app is how you consume the big data, that's fine. But the small app running in your device also provides the context. It provides the context, and the interesting thing is the context could be implicit or explicit. So what I mean by implicit context is the time, location and stuff like that, where the device implicitly knows what the context is. Explicit is whatever the user provides as he types in on the device. So using this implicit context and the explicit context, you take these two, filter the big data and provide the value to the user. So what are all the sum of the context, right? The user context, the form factor of the device itself. So whether he's accessing it from iPad or iPhone or all these different sizes of the device, it helps you to kind of get a feel of what the user would want. If it's an iPad, maybe you can show him more information. If it's an iPhone, you have to be very careful about what you're showing. Then the location, the time. The most important thing is don't think of the device as only what the user has in his hand. There is also, this device is interacting with lots of other devices out there, like a beacon, right? So there is an interaction of the device, what you have in the hand, as well as what it interacts with out there. Similarly, you have what's called as Internet of Things, which you might have heard. So somebody could be having a smartphone sitting in a car. At the same time, the car has an implant in terms of Internet of Things devices. So your phone could interact with it, convert a lot of context as implicit context, go there out to the cloud and get the data and provide the value to the user. And finally, you have the user role. So it could be, if you take a CRM application, a user could be either a salesperson or it could be a sales manager. It could be different kinds of roles. When the user logs in into the small app, that role is provided explicitly. So using the explicit context and the implicit context, the app could add a lot more value. So there you have the big data, you have the small app, and then you have the filters or the context filters like location, role, time, and history. So based on all these four, the big data is filtered and the value is shown in the small app. So let's look at some specific examples. Assume I were a salesperson, right? And I'm using a small app, an iPad or an iPhone app, and I'm connecting to the CRM system out there in the cloud. And as I'm driving down a place, assume the app in my hand knows my location, it goes out there to the cloud, brings out all the leads who are out there in the same location. So what would have just been a drive-through through a particular place becomes a moment of value, because now I can see all the leads who are there out there in the same location, and if I want to, I can actually go out there and meet them, right? So using my location, the data that was relevant to me was available to me in my small app. Let's take time. Assume I had scheduled a call with the customer 2 days back, and the small app in my hands could actually remind me half an hour before the call, saying, okay, you have an impending call coming up, right? So there is again a value adding there. And finally, assume I just randomly pick up a phone number and make a call, then this app could go out there to the database, check whether this particular phone number belongs to any prospect or a customer, and at the end of the whole interaction, there could be a helpful link saying, do you want to add a note to this, right? Because now I have spoken to the customer, the small app could prompt me into saying, do you want to add a note, so that I could add a note and this whole data could be synced back to the cloud, right? So these are all the various means by which a small app could use a user context, filter, and add value to the user. Now let me talk about a very unconventional app. When you think of a CRM system, most likely you will think of a sales manager app, or a sales admin app, or a sales administrator app. So these are the 2-3 small apps you would think about when you talk in the context of a CRM system. But one of the most primary jobs of a salesperson is to get lead information and put it back into the system in the cloud. So the lead information in lots of times is got in terms of visiting cards. So the person takes it, types it in the CRM system, and the whole thing goes out there and sits in the cloud. So we have a small app, it's a card scanner app basically. So you take the card, you use the small app, you scan it. It not only converts the card into a contact detail and stores it in the phone, it also syncs up at the same time with the cloud. So this is an example of an app which is an adjunct to the whole CRM system. So you don't look at this mobile app as a salesperson app or a sales manager app. This is a separate app that adds value to your CRM system in adjunct ways. Another example would be something like a Facebook Messenger app. If you look at Facebook, they actually have 3-4 apps for the same Facebook cloud application. So one of them is the Facebook Timeline app. The other app they have separately is the Messenger app, which is useful for chatting with your contacts. The idea is Facebook website is so huge, there are so many features, but this particular feature is very useful to the end user. So what they have done is they have put out a separate app so that the end user can use it only for chatting. So again, it is very conventional to think in terms of, oh, Facebook website is there, let's have an app for it. But they broke the app into 2-3 apps. One is a timeline app, one is an admin app, one is a messenger app, right? So they break the whole thing into 2-3 apps. So you look at these small apps out there and you look at the characteristics, or I should say advantages of small apps. One of the most important characteristic or advantages, it's very purpose driven. The small app, because of the screen size and stuff like that, is very purpose driven, and it's not feature driven. Basically, if you were to have an app in the desktop, you will try to put all kinds of links in it. Assuming if you're an application developer, you will try to stuff the whole thing with a lot of links. But in a phone, you don't have that latitude, so you need to be careful about it. So it's very purpose driven than feature driven. There's no clutter, otherwise the user will just drop the app and go away. And you have multiple apps for various purposes. Like as I was talking about the Facebook app, they have one for the timeline, one for the messenger. Similarly, if you take the CRM app, there's a card scanner app separately, there is a salesperson, sales admin, sales manager, different kinds of apps, all for the same cloud application in the cloud. And you could add values in very adjunct ways. So the CRM card scanner app is not a primary CRM application app, but you could develop a small app explicitly where the card is scanned and the data is uploaded to the cloud. And the small app can showcase hidden value of your application. So if you're an application developer or your company is developing applications, so it could have lots of features out there, and the end user may not be able to visualize all of them. But when you put it out as a separate app, the value is shown, right? So the hidden value is showcased. And finally, it's easy to pivot. As an application developer, lots of times you are making an guess about what the market wants. So you go about building an app, and if the market rejects it, you need to pivot fast. So given that this app is small and it's all working out of the data out there in the cloud, it's easier for you to pivot. So these are some of the characteristics or advantages of the small apps. So now I'll just step into the Zoho world. At Zoho, this has surely impacted our product architecture and design. Now, our view of the world, our architectural view of the world, if I may call so. So we look at the server as a repository of big data, right? When I use the word server, I'm referring to all the applications that we have there. Like we have a CRM application, we have an invoice application, we have a books application, we have a recruitment application. Now, each of these applications are storing the data. But we don't look at it as the data is stored by the respective applications. We just look at the data as out there in the cloud, there is a repository of all the data together, and that data is enhanced with lots of other data from other application providers. So there is one big bundle of database out there. So that is the server data repository. Then the server exposes all the data, or the data in the big database is exposed via REST APIs, right? So just in case, or you can just say it's all exposed via APIs. That's the thing. And the most important thing is all the data out there is queryable. So you don't look at it as, so if I go into a CRM system, I can query only the data relevant to CRM system. So inside the CRM system, I could query the data that is there, even of the invoice or the books or any of those, right? So the data out there is look like the big bundle, and all of the data is queryable. Finally, you have multiple clients which consume the data and provide value to the customer. So, and it's not only the data across our different servers like CRM system or invoice system or something. It's also enhanced with data from LinkedIn, maybe from Twitter. So all the data is enhanced, this full database is available, and any of our apps could query any of this data. So that's the view of the world. So I may just, it's Friday afternoon, so let me not talk a lot. I'll just play a small video which shows how we have integrated the CRM system into the mail system.
This is Jack, a sales executive. He wakes up early every morning with lots of motivation and enthusiasm and gets ready for a brand new day. Jack takes the subway, boards the train, and reaches his office. His goals are very simple. Check emails, call contacts, follow up prospects, close deals, and meet the sales target. But his email is so cluttered with friends' requests, invites, shopping offers, junk mail, auto responses, and more that he actually finds it difficult to keep track of emails from his contacts and prospects. Filters are not working too. Jack is frustrated. We gave him a CRM tool and added his email box inside the CRM so that he can not only keep track of his leads, contacts, and prospects, but can also keep track of emails from his contacts right within his CRM. But he has to constantly switch between tabs, besides creating tasks, adding notes, and checking contacts. Jack is tired. He skipped his lunch, made a few calls. Jack is losing enthusiasm. Jack is up for another new day and gets ready. He takes the subway, boards the train, and reaches his office. Today, we added Mail Magnet to his CRM tool. This gives Jack an instant notification when his contacts email him. He replies to the contact, adds even a follow-up task. He need not sift through his emails and need not switch between tabs. He had his lunch on time. End of the day, he was closer to hitting his sales target. Plus, he had more time to socialize and network with his dear ones.
Well, I'm not sure about the last slide, but at least he didn't have to switch a lot of tabs. Okay. So the important point is the CRM system did not look at its own data as the only thing to be provided to the customer or to the user who's using it. It could feed into the mail system, use some of its own things as filters into the mail system, fetch the data from there and provide value to the user. Right? I'll take another example. So basically we have a Zoho mail and we have the typical mail app for it. So what's the typical mail app? You open the system, you take your phone, log into the mail system, then look at all your inboxes, look at all the 100 mails and you just go through it. But interestingly, lots of times when you want to access your email, the first thing you do is search. Like you're looking for a particular email, you just want to pick up the phone, find out and go and search for it immediately. If it were a conventional mail app, you'll have to take the app, then go through some zillion steps before you land up at your search. So what we did was we turned this whole thing around. We made search the primary thing. So like what Google has one inbox, kind of a new app, right? So similarly, almost at the same time, we had released an app called Inbox Insight. Here the important point was search was made the primary thing, where people could even have saved searches, or they can just do some 2-3 clicks, formulate their search query, and that will go out there in the database, out there in the cloud, get the relevant mails and show it to the user. Not only that, the user could go and set some notifications and filters and all that. The point I'm trying to make here is, even in your own application, if you're an application software application development shop, so you have your application out there in the cloud, don't look at it as, oh, I have to have a faithful native application in my phone reflecting my web client, right? There are a lot of values, there are a lot of ways by which you can add value to the user. So you can split your native application into smaller bits and have multiple native apps. Right? So that's what we mean by there's a big data and multiple small apps. Right? Like even in our case for this mail app, we could have just settled for this, but we also have this as well as have this. And the last example. So as you might have seen, most of us present our presentations using a Zoho tool called Zoho Show. It's both an authoring as well as a presentation software. Now let's assume you have a presentation to make and you're traveling in a car and you have some ideas for the presentation. So what you typically do is you take a notepad and start writing, then you go back to your desk, then you start typing, and then you leave that, go back home, then you realize it's not there. So all these problems come up, right? So over and above a very conventional app for Zoho Show, we also have this app which is used for making notes for your presentations, which gets synced to the cloud. So now the video please. That's very relevant to the traffic, by the way. So again, the point here was there was a very specific app.
Stand up, man. Mr. Rega. And he's also a great model for us.
Oh, because he has lost his hair, is it? So that's my favorite joke on him. So yeah, so the point here was, again, we have like 2-3 apps for the same big data app out there in the cloud, right? So what are the benefits observed? Going back, one of the things I talked about was our view of the world, right? So where we look at the server as a repository of big data, and everything out there is exposed via APIs, right? So because of that, there are surely some benefits observed. So one is, because all the data is exposed via API, your server can become a part of a workflow. So like your server can contact another server, or something else can contact you. The whole thing becomes a part of the programmable web. And one thing we have observed is, so now we have multiple teams. So we have a server team, we have web client team that develops web client based for the desktops, laptops. Then we have a web client team that does for the iPhone, iPad. Then we have the native client team for the iPhone, iPad. Then we have Android teams. Then so lots of client teams, correct? Because nowadays the expectation is, whenever you put out an app out there in the cloud, they want the mobile first, and mobile is not one mobile. It's like Android, iOS, Windows. Then a lot of people want even native clients for your desktops. So if you count the number of client teams, your fingers won't be enough, right? So there are so many clients that will come up. So the interesting thing is, all the client teams work out on the same API, right? And each of them can be small and independent, because each of them is using some API, so each of them can be small and independent. And because you are producing APIs on your server, lots of third-party developers can extend our application, right? So these are all some of the benefits of having a API-based server, which is very relevant in the context of the big data and the small apps. So these are examples of extensions where third-party developers had taken some of the Zoho systems and integrated with systems outside without taking any help from the Zoho developers, like MailChimp and CRM, then there's Evernote and CRM, and then there's Zapier and CRM. So all these integrations happen because the data was exposed by API. So for you, the takeaway would be, in your respective applications, if you have API exposing the data, you're also enabling third-party people to develop something on top of it and add a lot of value back to your application. So in the closing, so there's a big database in the cloud. APIs are the query interface. The user context comes in as a filter. So you have many purpose-driven, specific small apps bringing out the value.